Well, good evening to each and every one of you, and thank you so much for tuning in tonight to another edition of WordUp Wednesdays. I hope and pray that you've had a good day so far, a good week so far. If not, I pray that things get better for you. Listen, go ahead on and like, love, and share this with someone. Let someone know that Bible study is taking place right here at St. John's online. Go ahead on and grab your Bible, your study guide, whatever you may be using tonight, and let's go into the Word of God. While you're doing that, let's go to God in prayer. God, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your grace, your mercy, your love, and your kindness, and thank you for giving us another opportunity to study your Word. Please, oh God, continue to be with us as we go through this broadcast and even as we go through this week. Bless those who are watching, those who will watch, and those who will watch after this broadcast has ended. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we are ending our study tonight on dysfunctional families. This Family Matters piece on dysfunctional family. And for the final time, here is one last definition for us to consider for a dysfunctional family. Dysfunctional families are the opposite of what would be considered a healthy family or healthy families. And within a dysfunctional family, relationships or communication is impaired, and members are unable to have closeness or express themselves to each other. One more time, within a dysfunctional family, relationships or communication is impaired, and members are unable to have closeness or express themselves to each other. There is often a struggle to meet the needs of all of the family members, and family members within a dysfunctional family often do not feel safe to express themselves, and needs are often viewed as weaknesses. In these families, people often seek to hide their most vulnerable parts and minimize themselves to avoid close interactions, and these are more likely to result in emotional pain or disappointment. Families often do not feel safe to express themselves and their needs, and they are often viewed as weaknesses if they do express themselves or their needs. And in these families, people often seek to hide their most vulnerable parts and minimize and avoid close interactions, as these are more likely to result in emotional pain or disappointment. Last week, I gave you the roles that are played in a dysfunctional family, seeking or trying to see if you and I can examine in our families if we have been a part of a dysfunctional family, or through the text, the roles that individuals may play in a dysfunctional family. This week, I want to give a few behavioral characteristics of those dysfunctional family roles. So I gave you dysfunctional family roles, and tonight I want to lean into the characteristics of those roles. And according to an article written by The Guest House, which is a center that provides assistance for men and women whose mental and physical health is suffering due to traumatic events. They describe that within a dysfunctional family, or within the dysfunctional family roles, there is a behavioral mask and the feelings the mask is hiding. So within a dysfunctional family role, you'll have two sides. You'll have the mask and then the parts that the mask is hiding. And there is a consistent pattern within the dysfunctional family roles of each member attempting to cope with the addiction in the family. So here are some of the behavioral characteristics of 6 dysfunctional family roles. The first role is the actor or the outer, the actor. They have a mask, and this is what they show. They show that they are charming, aggressive, self-righteous, and they blame others. But that mask is hiding something else. Here's the hidden part: fear, guilt, despair, feelings of worthlessness, loneliness. So one more time, the roles have subparts. The actor has a mask. The mask is they're charming, they're aggressive, they're self-righteous, and they blame others. But behind the mask and behind the actor is another hidden part. They're fearful, they have guilt, despair, feelings of worthlessness, and loneliness. Here's another role, the caretaker. Here's the mask that the caretaker wears. Responsible, virtuous, shames others, manipulative. But then here's the hidden part of the caretaker. They also deal with guilt, exhaustion, trying to be who you're not or trying to overbe something or someone creates exhaustion. There's some rage. They are sometimes victimized. And they also may feel some feelings of paranoia. Here's another role, the hero. Here's the mask, successful. They seem like they have their life together. They're independent, they're helpful, they're perceptive. But then hidden, they too also have to deal with guilt, confusion, feeling needy, and the fear of failure. They also have to deal with feelings of inadequacy. Here's the scapegoat role. Behind the scapegoat role, this is the mask that they wear. They are defiant, hostile. They may act out. They're more loyal to peers than family, and they too blame others. But hidden behind that mask, they deal with the fear of rejection. They have difficulty trusting. They are confused. There's some loneliness, and there's even some feelings of worthlessness. Here's another role, the mascot. Now, you'll have to go back to last week's lesson to find out these roles that I'm lifting up and their meaning. Here's the mascot. Here's the mask that they wear, the peacemaker. They're lovable, non-serious, action seeker. They're fragile. But then here's the hidden piece to that role. They often struggle with feeling left out. They have the fear of being alone. They become anxious or depressed when they take a moment to slow down or stop. Here's another role, the lost child. The mask that they wear appears that they are mellow, extremely independent. They may seem to be a loner. They are withdrawn. But then here's a hidden mask. They deal with loneliness, feeling valueless. They also have some moments of rage, feeling powerless. And they also have fear of exposure. So these are the behavioral characteristics of dysfunctional family roles. They wear a mask that presents one thing, but hidden behind the mask is another thing. Think about these roles, think about your family, and even think about the role that you may play within your family. Are you the mascot? Are you the scapegoat? Are you the actor? Are you the caretaker? Are you the hero? Are you the lost child? Whichever role you may think that you may have played or may be playing now, you show one thing, but behind what you show is another feeling. It's the things that are hidden. So those are the characteristics of the dysfunctional family roles. Let's dig into the text tonight, and I promise you we'll be out your way tonight. Our limit tonight, what we're looking at in our dysfunctional family study, tonight we're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 13, verses 13 through 39. 2 Samuel chapter 13, rather not verses 13, but rather verses 23 through 39. Verses 23 through 39 of chapter 13. 2 Samuel chapter 13, verses 23 through 39. Verses 23 through 39. The language of our study tonight is Hebrew. We're still in the Old Testament. The literature, we are in one of the books of history. We are in one of the books of history. And while we are aware that 1st and 2nd Samuel were originally one book and provides us with important information that bridge the gap between the judges and the full establishment of the royal line of David, we also need to know something else about this particular text. We need to know the theme of both 1st and 2nd Samuel. And the theme of both Samuel is this. The theme is how God, which is Israel's true king, at the request of the people, delegated royal power or control. The theme of both 1st and 2nd Samuel is how God, Israel's true king, at the request of the people, delegated God's royal power and control. He first gave it over to Saul, and then once God's Spirit removed itself from Saul, it was then passed over into David. And without God orchestrating any of this in 1st and 2nd Samuel, none of it would have happened. Also, what we need to know, again, is that when you read 2nd Samuel deals with two things. It deals with David's rise to power in chapters 1 through 10, and also the troubles within his family and himself in chapters 13 through 20. The location of the text is Jerusalem, which is the capital of Israel at the time of the text. We're located in Jerusalem. Now, in Bible study, since we're here, Jerusalem, the word Jerusalem is really two words that make one word. In Hebrew, it's pronounced Yerushalem. And the beginning of that, Yeru, Y-E-R-U, means flow. Flow. That's the first word, Yeru, flow. The ending part of that, Shalem, is the word Shalem, which means complete and whole. Yerushalem. Yeru means flow, Y-E-R-U. The ending part of that, S-H-A-L-A-I-M, means complete or whole. The ending part of Jerusalem, Shalem, the word shalom is also derived from this word. So when you put Jerusalem together, Jerusalem in our translation, it means pointing to the way of completeness. Jerusalem could mean pointing to the way of completion or completeness. There are others who believe that Jerusalem could also mean the city of peace. The ending part of that, they take the word shalom, means peace. So it could really have two meanings, pointing to the way of completeness or the city of peace. And whenever, if you're like me, I can put them together. Whenever you have peace, you also have completeness. So that's what Jerusalem could mean. Let's look at our leads tonight. Our leads have not changed. Our characters in this text have not changed. We have a man by the name of Absalom. Absalom's name means father of peace. Father of peace. He is David's third son. We then have Amnon. Amnon's name means faithful. He is David's oldest son that was born at Hebron. And Hebron at the time of Amnon's birth was the capital of the nation of Israel. We know David, and then we have a man by the name of Jonadab. And Jonadab's name means God is bounteous. or bountiful. And he is friend / somewhat cousin of Amnon. So now that we've got that taken care of, let's dive into this text. So when you read 2 Samuel, the rest of this of chapter 13, verses 23 through 39, what we've already covered is that tragedy has taken place in David's family. His son's perversion has caused him to take advantage of his half-sister Tamar. She's raped and left to live a life of shame and disgrace in their brother Absalom's house. When the word is made known about what had taken place, David, though upset, does nothing about it. And within these verses, verses 23 through 39, we discover that it will be Absalom who will avenge for his sister's rape. The dysfunction that takes place leaves David's daughter violated, one son dead, and the other one on the run. Now, when we continue to read this, you'll discover something else. That the murder of Amnon will be murdered in this particular text. The murder of Amnon, write this down, is not just a punishment for Amnon. Amnon's murder is not just what Amnon receives for raping his half-sister. It's also a punishment for David. It's a punishment for David for what happened in chapter 11. Because David was involved in the rape of Bathsheba and the murder of her husband Uriah, the same now has fallen upon his house. Here's the lesson for this. Dysfunction can be a result of generational curses or sin. David's sin in chapter 11 has now affected his entire family. It could also go with what Paul writes about in Galatians. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that shall he or she also reap. David took advantage of Bathsheba, killed her husband, and now the same thing, the same dysfunction has now arrived in his own house. When we look at verses 23 through 29, you'll discover that these verses outline Absalom's plan of vengeance. And it shows us how he carried this plan out. And it's done under the disguise of a family celebration. And Absalom's plan to kill his brother is done under the disguise of a family celebration. In verse 23, we will discover that in the previous verses, the text tells us that Absalom said that he would not say anything to Amnon after his sister's rape. And according to verse 23, it has been 2 years since any form of communication has been made between the two. However, Absalom still does not directly interact with Amnon alone. Remember, I read from the New International Version or the Jewish Study Bible, and this is what the NIV says around the New King James Version rather says around verse 23. And it came to pass after 2 full years that Absalom had sheep shearers in Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim. So Absalom invited all the king's sons. Then Absalom came to the king and said, kindly note your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go with your servants. But the king said to Absalom, no, my son, let us not all go now, lest we be a burden to you. Then he urged him, but he would not go, and he blessed them. What's happening, especially in verses 24 and following, is that Absalom is planning this festive event during the time of sheep shearing. Sheep shearing is the process of cutting the wool off of sheep or an animal. But it is to have a celebration and a feast that follow the work. Absalom and his brothers are not doing the sheep shearing. They're just celebrating after the work is done. And you can find this in 1 Samuel chapter 25, the process of sheep shearing. Now, this was not an invitation to sheep shear, but rather this was an invitation to celebrate after the process has been done. It's been 2 years since any form of communication has been made with Amnon, but it's not made directly. In verses 24, we see that Absalom invites his father to attend. And though the invitation is made to the king's sons, probably out of courtesy, Absalom invites David, but David declines. This was probably done, we want to be honest, this was probably done to prevent some kind of suspicion for what he really wanted, which is asked in verses 26. Look at the rest of the text. Been 2 years now since any, I'm going to keep saying it, since any form of communication has been made, which the lesson from this portion of the text shows us that dysfunction produces, once again, impaired communication within the family unit. And families with dysfunction within them refuse at times to talk to or be in the presence of other family members. That's clearly seen right here in the text. 2 years, nothing's been said until this moment. Now, out of courtesy, probably he invited his father. David declines. Now, with David declining, it gives Absalom the opportunity to get what he really wanted. To get what he really wanted. He asked in verses 26 to 27 to allow Amnon to take his place. David questions that. Absalom insists, and David yields. Let's read. And Absalom, verse 24, came to the king and said, "Your servant is having his flocks sheared. Would your majesty and your company come with your servant?" But the king answered Absalom, "No, my son, we must not all come, or we'll be a burden to you." He urged him, but he would not go, and said goodbye to him. Verse 26, thereupon Absalom said, "In that case, let my brother Amnon come with us." To which the king replied, "He shall not go with you." But Absalom urged him, and he sent with him Amnon and all of the other princes. David says, "I can't go." Absalom says, "Well, that's all right. Send Amnon in your stead." With David questioning Absalom's need for Amnon, I've got to ask something. I need to ask this question. What does David know? Or is he trying to hide Amnon, to spare his life, to cover up what happened to Tamar? Why does he question Absalom's need for his brother. Why? Doesn't that make you wonder? What does David know that the text maybe not give us, maybe not is giving us tonight, for him to even question Absalom's need? Maybe perhaps David knows that Absalom hasn't talked to his own brother in 2 years. So maybe it just causes David to react in a certain way to ask the question, well, what you need him? You haven't spoken to him in 2 years, so why do you need him now? I don't know. I just needed to ask that. But I also need to put a pin here to suggest to you that there are those who suggest that Absalom's request for David could have been the initial plot of Absalom to kill David and take the throne. But that's another story for another lesson, because that does take place where Absalom tries to take the throne away from David, and as a result, he is, yes, in fact, killed. But let's get back to this. David doesn't go. Absalom asks for Amnon. David questions it, yet he yields to the request. And with, watch this, Amnon coming to the feast, Absalom finally has everything he needs to carry out his vengeance. The first thing, he has the presence of Amnon away from the watchful eye of David. Absalom couldn't do anything if he wanted to with David being around or with David watching over Amnon. So he had to get him away. The second thing he has now, he has a location away from Jerusalem that will allow an escape for him. Remember, he's not inviting the king's sons to Jerusalem per se, or to his private house. He's inviting them outside of Jerusalem. So now he has Amnon, and he also has a location that will provide for him a way of an escape. In verses 28 through 29, when we read this, these verses outline Absalom's plan and it coming to pass. Like his father, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, Absalom will not kill Amnon directly. Instead, he will have his servants to do the dirty work. Where do you see that at? Well, when David wanted Uriah killed, David did not directly kill Uriah with his own hands. He allowed Joab to place Uriah on the front line of the battlefield, and there he died in battle. Absalom wants Amnon dead, yet Absalom is smart enough to know that he will not do it with his own hands. He asked his servants to do it. You don't believe me? Let's read the Bible. Look at verse 28. Now Absalom gave his attendants these orders. Watch, and when Amnon is merry with wine, when he's drunk, and I tell you to strike down Amnon, kill him. Don't be afraid, for it is I who give you the order. Act with determination like brave men. Absalom's attendants did to Amnon as Absalom had ordered, whereupon all of the other princes mounted their mules and fled. Absalom told his servants, wait until Amnon is drunk, listen for my command, and you kill him. They did just that, and the other sons got on their mules and ran away. They were fearful that there would be a wholesale massacre of royal heirs right there at Baal Hazar that day. So they left. Now they didn't realize that Absalom wasn't trying to kill all of them. He was just trying to get back at Amnon. But yet they got out of the way because they were saying, look, we're not sitting here, we're not going to stay here and watch all of us die. When we look at verses 30 through 36 of the text, David receives the news, but it's not the whole truth. And there is also a period of mourning that takes place within these verses. After Amnon is murdered and after the other sons flee the scene, David is told some false information. He's told that all of the king's sons were murdered by Absalom, but that's not true. Let's read it. Verse 30 says, they were still on the road when a rumor reached David that Absalom had killed all the princes and that not one of them had survived. At this time, here's the morning, David rent his garment and laid down on the ground, and all of his quarters stood by with their clothes rent. But Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shammah, said, my Lord, must not think that all of the young princes have been killed. Only Amnon is dead, for this has been decided by Absalom ever since his sister Tamar was raped. David grieves the fact that all of his sons are dead, but that was not true. In fact, when we look at verse 31 with David's grief, what it does, it really foreshadows a later moment of terrible grief when Absalom is killed. Jonadab, the friend who plotted with Amnon, corrected him, told him that it was only Amnon who was killed, and it was because Absalom has been plotting this ever since Tamar was raped. Now, I wonder because it's interesting. It's interesting about this. This is very interesting. I wonder, church, did anyone know Jonadab's part in the whole ordeal? I want to know who else knew the plan that caused Tamar to get raped, that eventually caused Amnon to die. Remember, I told you last week that Amnon did not act by himself. He did not come up with the plan. It was Jonadab who came up with him playing like he was sick, telling him, when you play like you're sick, tell them you want Tamar, tell your daddy you want Tamar to come in to take care of you. And there you have your alone time with your sister. It was Jonadab who came up with the plan. So I wonder who else might have known. I wonder who else might have known about this plan, because I'm sure that now that Amnon is dead, Jonadab probably fears for his life as well. He probably fears for his life if Absalom knew that Amnon did not work alone. I'm letting you think about that. Because isn't it interesting how now Jonadab shows up just to tell David, hey, look, don't grieve too hard. All of your sons aren't dead. It's just Amnon. Now, we could argue that he does that because that's his friend. Close friends, in a sense, could be his cousin if we're looking at this in the form of relationship. And he's, too, grieving the loss for his friend, cousin, however you want to call it. And so he's trying to console David, but maybe that's also him trying to cover his own tracks. Hey, let me just tell you this. All your sons aren't dead. Absalom is the reason why Amnon is dead, and it's because Amnon raped his sister, and it's been planned ever since that day. We look at the rest of the verses, rest of the text, verses 34 through 39. This is a pretty quick lesson tonight. These verses provide us with the information concerning Absalom during all of this. He's killed his brother, but what else is going on now with Absalom? Well, in verse 34, Absalom fled the scene too. Just like the rest of the princes, Absalom fled the scene. Absalom got out of there. Why? Because Absalom did not commit the murder himself. Probably to cover up that he did it, not knowing that Jonadab would tell on him. He leaves the scene like everybody else. And in verse 34, this is the first of 3 times in this text alone where we are told of Absalom fleeing. I'm going to read it to you. It says, meanwhile, Absalom fled. The watchman on duty looked up and saw a large crowd coming from the road to his rear, from the side of the hill. Jonadab said to the king, see, the princes have come. It is just as your servant said. As he finished speaking, the princes came in and broke into weeping, and David and all of his quarters wept bitterly too. Absalom, verse 37, had fled, and he came to Talmai. Talmai, son, he's the king of Geshur. And King David mourned over his son a long time. Absalom, who had fled to Geshur, this is the 3rd time, remained there 3 years, and King David was pinning away for Absalom, for the king had gotten over Amnon's death. Verse 37 tells us that he took refuge with his maternal grandfather, who is the king of Geshur, which is in Syria. And we are told with some ambiguity right there in this text also that David mourns for his son, but which son? Is he mourning for Amnon, who is dead, or is he mourning for Absalom, who is a fugitive, or maybe both? Who is he mourning for? Right there, it tells us. But Absalom fled, and David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And King David longed to go to Absalom, for he had been comforted concerning Amnon because he was dead. So, during the initial point of David's mourning, who is he mourning for? Is he mourning for Amnon? Is he mourning for Absalom? Or is he mourning for both? Verse 38 tells us he stays there for 3 years. It's a long time to be on the run. And if by chance David is grieving and wants to see Absalom, that's what verse 39 tells us. He longed to go to Absalom. Why doesn't he bring Absalom home right away? Why, if he longed to see him, why doesn't he bring him home right away? Well, could it be that he's guilty of murdering the crown prince? And that there are limits to what a king can do himself? Amnon was the oldest, which would have placed him in direct line to the throne. And it's also going to take some heavy negotiation from Joab, 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 which is David's attendant, in chapter 14 to bring him home. And even when he brings him home in chapter 14, dysfunction is still there. David even forgives Absalom, but in chapter 15, Absalom tries to take the throne and kill his own father. He tries to do it in such a way that it sends David, watch this, on the run. It's a lot going on in David's family. So this is part of the dysfunction in David's family. And in the end, his daughter is raped. And both of his sons will be dead, will die. Both of his sons will die. In the end, out of all of that, daughter is raped. Absalom and Amnon will also, they will die. They will die. So hopefully, throughout this study, kind of gotten some good information about dysfunctionality within the biblical narrative, that there are some dysfunctional families within the Bible, that your family is not just the only dysfunctional family, and there is some hope with the dysfunction if by chance we are able to tackle the dysfunction within our families and meet it head on. I love you. Let me give you some events that are coming up. Don't forget about the women's retreat taking place on the 13th and 14th of October. It's $45 per person. Make sure you sign up online, or you can sign up in the vestibule on Sunday. Don't forget to email me at wordup@mysjcc.org with some comments, some questions, and even some suggestions for some lessons as we go forth in the future. I'm wearing pink tonight, if you can see it, and in the background, Media Ministry got some pink lights up as we celebrate Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We're celebrating it on the 22nd. I know that the Ray of Hope Walk is that Sunday as well, but we'll be celebrating it here all month long. Pink Sunday is on the 22nd. College Sunday is on the 31st of October. And next month, which is November, we're celebrating 179 years of ministry. We got some exciting things planned, but also we're having Thankful Thursday. That's going to be our revival for the month of November. Every Thursday except Thanksgiving Thursday, we will be in the sanctuary in revival. I've got some phenomenal preachers coming in to bless us for Thankful Thursday. You'll see it on the announcements this coming Sunday. So there'll be no Word Up Wednesday because we're having Thankful Thursday in November, celebrating 179 years of ministry. Know that I always love you. I'm always praying for you. I pray that you have a great week in the days to come. If not, hey, we'll try it again next week. But I pray God's blessings be upon you. When we get back next week, we will be starting another study through another book. I try for the year teaching Bible study to tackle 2 books if I can. The beginning of the year, we tackled the Old Testament book of Ruth. And when we get back next week, we will be looking at the book of Colossians. That's in the New Testament. That's the book of Colossians. And so we will journey through that book in the upcoming weeks. All right. I love you. I got to go. The music is playing. Peace.